every once in a great while, a new superfood comes into play. Now, I hate the word superfood because I feel like it implies this food can do everything and yada yada. And I just don't believe in that. I feel like there's context, but I consider a superfood something that has more benefit than it does drawback. And with Sacha Inchi seeds, the research is pretty darn clear. Plus, you can simply look at the label and realize, at least for someone that's doing a low carb protocol, it is definitely awesome because generally speaking, roasted Sacha Inchi seeds have 0 net carbs and a tremendously high level of protein and super, super low omega-6s and high omega-3s. Like, what more could you really ask for? Anyhow, let's dive into the nitty-gritty. Okay, the best part is that Sacha Inchi is a seed, not a nut. Now, it's interesting because nuts are a common allergen. Now, in the very clear way, when some people like eat nuts, they get itchy, they start sneezing, maybe anaphylaxis, whatever, but also even just at a systemic inflammatory level. I talk to a lot of people that are doing low carb that eat high amounts of nuts and they just feel inflamed all the time. That is somewhat common. Seeds are less likely to do that. They still can, but they're less inflammatory in that particular sense as far as an allergy is concerned. Now, that being said, they're also a little bit lower in phytic acid than a lot of nuts are. So this is really, really good news, but there's more than just that. Let's break down more. If we look at the bioavailability, it's really interesting. There was a study that was published in the International Journal of Food Properties that looked at the bioavailability. They found that raw Sacha Inchi seeds had pretty decent bioavailability of things like copper, magnesium, potassium, manganese, a couple other minerals. But then when they were boiled, it actually decreased the bioavailability, which is kind of intriguing. And it's not uncommon because there's something that leaches into the water. But then when they look at roasted Sacha Inchi seeds, it increased the bioavailability of copper, magnesium, manganese, and iron, and a couple others as well. But copper, I especially pay attention to because I did another video that copper is one of the most common mineral deficiencies that people have on a lower carb protocol. And there's a multitude of reasons, but it's just kind of interesting. It's hard to find a good bioavailable source of copper like this. Now let's jump into the fats for a second. Okay, the most abundant fats are going to be linolenic acid, linoleic acid, and my personal, probably favorite fat, oleic acid, okay, which is something that converts into a lot of really cool things in your body as far as just overall metabolic benefit goes. But the best part is the overall omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, okay? Omega-6s are not inherently bad. I know there's a lot of like metabolic influencers and things like that talk about that and they just rain on omega-6s all the time. Look, we are designed to handle omega-6s. We're not that fragile. Come on. You don't want to be like that pathetic where you don't have any omega-6s. Like, we can handle omega-6. There's omega-6s in animal fats too, okay? It's just the way it is. But what we do have to be cognizant of is the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. And that's where, just given our hyper-processed just way of living, we consume way too much omega-6 compared to omega-3. Sacha Inchi is so unique because we are talking a 1:4 up to a 1:10 ratio omega-6 to 3. So it has way more omega-3 in it than it does omega-6. And then when you're roasting them, it increases the ratio even more. Now, I know what you're thinking, okay? If you're seasoned in the world of fatty acid metabolism, you'll know that omega-3s from plants don't really do a whole lot. They don't convert into EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. They don't convert into docosahexaenoic or DHA, okay, very well. Okay, it's like a 1 to 3% conversion. So I'm not going to sit here touting the benefits of the omega-3s in that fashion. What I am interested in is how, by having a higher level of omega-3s, we are improving that omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, which we'll talk more about later, because that is the main thing. There's not going to find that a lot with many nuts or seeds. Now also, it's very, very high protein. So in conjunction with having this high amount of healthy fats, also has high amounts of protein, which can trigger what is called peptide YY, which has a positive influence on ghrelin, making it a very, very satiating seed. Now, in addition to that, the amino acid profile is great. It has a high abundance of all 9 of the essential amino acids. This is kind of rare. You don't usually see high quantities of the EAAs in nuts and seeds, but they also have quite a bit of the non-essentials as well. And the third most abundant amino in Sacha Inchi is leucine, which is the more anabolic amino acid that helps stimulate muscle growth and muscle repair. So very, very beneficial there. Now, there's some very interesting stuff when it comes down to the fats themselves, the oils. And this is where we get more nuancy and more just beyond just basic macronutrient things. The study was published in the journal Food and Function. It took a look at 42 individuals, and they had them eat 2 high saturated fat breakfasts, so pretty big breakfasts. One of the groups ended up having 15 milliliters of Sacha Inchi oil along with their breakfast. Okay, it's the pure oil in this case. But if you were having, like, say, Sacha Inchi butter, which exists, then you could get this oil, right? What they found is that 38% of the participants that had the Sacha Inchi oil ended up having a reduction in postprandial glucose increases. They didn't have as much of a glucose spike. Those same 38% also saw an increase in insulin sensitivity. An increase in insulin sensitivity that seemed to be correlated with more expression of what is called SIRT1, SIRT2-in-1. Now I'm going to get down to what that means in a second, because SIRT1 is something I talk about a lot on this channel. It's where a lot of Dr. David Sinclair's research is surrounding sirtuins. Sirtuins are absolutely associated and correlated with longevity. That's why Dr. David Sinclair is so into it. So there's a potential expression of SIRT1 that is coming from Sacha Inchi oil. So because the thing that came to mind for me was, how come only 38% of the people that had the Sacha Inchi oil had a positive effect on glucose and insulin sensitivity? Why wasn't it in everyone? Well, perhaps, and this is speculation, but it makes sense, perhaps the 38% that saw an improvement were the 38% that had metabolic dysregulation. Maybe they had an issue, and that's why the activation or the expression of SIRT1 had a positive impact. Because SIRT1, one of the many things that SIRT1 can do is help regulate glucose and help regulate insulin activity within the body. So if 38% hypothetically were metabolically dysfunctional, the activation of the sirtuins possibly helped it out, and that's why they saw an improvement, and maybe others were already at the healthy state and didn't have to worry about it. That's purely my hypothesis and my reasoning behind it, and not what the literature specifically says. The literature just looks at the data, but it's interesting to ponder. There's not a lot of companies that are doing Sacha Inchi right, and the one that I like the most is actually today's video sponsor, which is a company called Brass Roots. Okay, Brass Roots is a Sacha Inchi company that was formed in 2019. They're New Orleans based. And right now, their main store is at Sprouts. That's where I found them. That's actually how they discovered me. They saw that I talked about them with no paid promotion whatsoever in a Sprouts video, and I highlighted how awesome they were. They reached out to me and said, hey, you've got to do like a more detailed video. So Sprouts is definitely the way to go. Then they do have them at Whole Foods in Louisiana. They also have them at Wegmans, and of course you can get them on Amazon as well. Now they always use organic Sacha Inchi. So they have roasted Sacha Inchi seeds. They have their Sacha Inchi butter, which would be a great way to get more of sort of those oils and those fats that we talked about. Okay, then they also have these Sacha Inchi protein puffs, which are a great way to get some more protein for the kiddos and things like that. And then of course they have these awesome bars that are coming out here soon. By the time the video is released, they might be pretty close to being released, so keep an eye out for that. Now their name Brass Roots is sort of a play on the word grassroots, right? And that has to do with the work that they do in terms of community. Basically what they do is they help lower income youth learn about nutrition. Okay, so they have a lot of pieces in play to really give back to the community, especially in New Orleans, where there's this big influx of sort of, low income that's really trying to learn about nutrition. So really cool stuff there. Then they source all of their Sacha Inchi seeds from Thailand. Okay, so really good moist environment where the Sacha Inchi can really grow well. And the best part of that is the proceeds from the farms there end up going to fund a K through 12 school. So everything is sort of giving back. It's really awesome. And the founder, who's become a pretty good friend of mine, his name is Aaron Gailmore, and he started this whole company just because he was frustrated after his dad was diagnosed with heart disease. And he really wanted to find a way to work towards better health and work towards something that would just be great for everybody, all sort of inspired by his dad, which I think is awesome. If you want to try them, I put a link down below that can save you a few bucks, especially if you use that code. And if you have a Sprouts that's nearby you, that might be the way to go, because that way you can try a bag and see if you like it. Now we need to start looking a little bit deeper, get a little bit more nerdy, okay? Because if you start looking at cardiovascular effects, inflammation, gut health, well, it starts looking even cooler. And I'm not just saying this because, I like a certain brand of Sacha Inchi. I'm saying this because this expands into nutrition in general, not just Sacha Inchi. It's just Sacha Inchi highlights a lot of this for us, right? There's a study that was published in the journal Biomedicine and Pharmacotherapy. Okay, it took a look at omega-3s and omega-6s, and this is where we can extrapolate some information from this. They found that a high ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 ended up leading to a higher risk of cardiovascular disease, higher risk of cancer, higher risk of autoimmune disease, higher risk of just various inflammatory conditions. And what we saw with this study is that the opposite was the case with high omega-3 to omega-6s. So high omega-6 compared to omega-3 led to the risk of these issues. High omega-3 compared to omega-6 led to suppression of the risk of these issues. So what's happening here? Well, higher levels of omega-6s can lead to what are called eicosanoid metabolic derivatives, or basically these metabolic byproducts of eicosanoids. Okay. Now, when you have this happening, these are like derivatives from arachidonic acid. What happens with this is that if they start to aggregate and they start to build up, that can lead to thrombosis, it can lead to atheromas, it can lead to other inflammatory issues. But the operative words here are aggregations of these metabolic byproducts of arachidonic acid. What that means is that by consuming some omega-6s, you're not making yourself at higher risk, okay? By consuming an extraordinary amount of omega-6s, in contrast to your omega-3 intake, then you're running into an issue. Because what's interesting is the omega-3s inhibit the activity of those eicosanoid metabolic byproducts of arachidonic acid. So it's a balance, you see. The omega-6s and the arachidonic acid, that's not the problem. Our body can deal with arachidonic acid and put it to use to do good things. But when there's too much arachidonic acid, too much without omega-3s to sort of quell the negative, then you run into a problem. Too much of anything is bad. Okay, we could probably find a problem with too much omega-3. In fact, we do. Okay, quelling inflammation too much with too much omega-3 is a problem as well. But we do want to be skewed closer to like a 1-to-1 as much as we can, or very like practical, realistic case, like even like a 5-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in our body is probably okay. Just not this 20 or 25 or 30-to-1 that most of us are living in. That's the problem. Here's an interesting study surrounding inflammation with Sacha Inchi oil though. Granted, this is a rodent model study, so take that with a drop of oil, but the reality is still pretty interesting to look at. They gave obese rats Sacha Inchi oil for 11 weeks. They found they had a decrease in bad cholesterol, a decrease in triglycerides, a decrease in inflammatory cytokines, decrease in tumor necrosis factor alpha, but most interestingly, an increase in antioxidant capacity, which suggests that for whatever reason, we don't really know, Sacha Inchi oil may actually have free radical neutralizing capabilities. That's pretty interesting. Or maybe it's just the modulation of inflammation that's allowing this to kind of occur. I'm not suggesting that it's magically going to fix all your problems, because this is a rodent model study. It needs to be, I don't know, done in humans and looked at more, but very, very interesting. And while we're talking about rats, there's an interesting study that was published on gut health. This one was published in the journal Food and Function, and it gave rats Sacha Inchi shells. So without the fats, just the shell. Okay, so pure the fiber, right? What they found is when they gave rats this fiber, they had a better ratio by quite a dramatic amount of what is called Bacteroidetes to Firmicutes. So Firmicutes, we don't want a high amount of. Bacteroidetes, we do want a high amount of. It flip-flopped a bad situation into being a good situation. But again, that is a little bit nuancy and it's hard to say because fiber in general could generally help that situation out. But what we can find from this is that Sacha Inchi does contain fibers that our bacteria seem to like, or at least rat bacteria seems to like. So when you look at the big picture, as far as the benefit that you get from it, from a satiating snack that's very high protein, super duper ridiculously low carb, I'm all about the Sacha Inchi, so I'm gonna keep diving into this. I love the earthy taste of them as well. It's just got a different kind of taste from most seeds, and it actually feels legitimately satiating. Plus, you can take the powder, you can take the ground version of it, put it in smoothies, do whatever, and it just tastes awesome. So as always, I'll see you tomorrow.